In this tutorial video, we're going to be talking about the concept of exceptions in Java. Now, an exception in Java is a problem that arises during the execution of a program. So an exception can occur for many different reasons. For example, a user has entered invalid data, a file that needs to be opened cannot be found, or also a network connection has been lost in the middle of communications, or even the Java virtual machine has run out of memory. So some of these exceptions are caused by user error, other by programmer error, and others by physical resources that have failed in some manner. So to understand how exception handling works in Java, you first need to understand the three categories of exceptions. So the first category is known as checked exceptions. So a checked exception is an exception that is typically a user error or a problem that cannot be foreseen by the programmer. So for example, let's say a file is to be opened but cannot be found, an exception occurs. So these exceptions cannot simply be ignored at the time of compilation. Then we have runtime exceptions. Now a runtime exception is an exception that occurs that probably could have been avoided by the programmer. So as opposed to checked exceptions, runtime exceptions are ignored at the time of compilation. Now this brings us to the third category of exceptions, which really isn't an exception at all. And this is known as errors. So as I said, these aren't exceptions at all, but problems that arise beyond the control of the user or the programmer, sorry. So errors are typically ignored in the code because you can rarely do anything about an error. So for example, if a stack overflow occurs, an error will arise. So these are also ignored at the time of compilation. So when an error occurs within a method, the method creates an object and hands it off to the runtime system. The object, also called an exception object, contains information about the error, including its type and the state of the program where the error occurred. So creating an exception object and handling it to the runtime system is called throwing an exception. So after a method throws an exception, the runtime system attempts to find something to handle it. The set of possible somethings to handle this exception is the ordered list of methods that had been called to get to the method where the error occurred. So this list of methods is known as the call stack, which is represented here. So the runtime system then searches the call stack for a method that contains a block of code that can handle the exception. This block of code is called an exception handler. The search begins with the method in which the error occurred and proceeds through the call stack in the reverse order in which the methods were called. So when an appropriate handler is found, the runtime system passes the exception to the handler. If the runtime system searches all the methods on the call stack without finding an appropriate exception handler, as shown in this diagram here, the runtime system and consequently the program terminates. So you can think of this notion of exceptions as, for example, I'll use this analogy. Say you were throwing a ball, for example, and the ball goes from method to method, and until it's been caught, or in the Java language, the keyword is catch, it's going to keep on going until it reaches the main method of your program. So that's the concept of exceptions in Java. In the next video, we're going to be seeing how to apply exceptions in Java. So make sure you look at the next video.